In this snippet, I'm going to show you how to create secure webhooks with Stripe. But if you haven't done an integration between Stripe and Xano yet, go ahead to our payments documentation and follow this setup here to get your first Stripe webhook up and running. Then you'll have the basic information you need to know how to use this snippet. The page in Stripe's documentation that we are specifically designing for is checking the webhook signature. Basically, when a webhook is fired from Stripe, sending information to you, that you can verify with the signature that Stripe provides that that payload of data hasn't been modified in some way by an attacker who might be capturing that information, modifying it, and then sending it to you. And the way that you do that is through your webhook's secret. Stripe has a library that you could use in GitHub, but if you want to solve this problem in Xano, that means verifying the signature manually. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how we do that inside of Xano, and then how you can use it as a custom function on any Stripe integration that you might have as a verification step. All right, let's dig into it. So this snippet is going to create a couple of things for you. If you've built a Stripe integration following the documentation, then you'll already have session and user as a table. And what the snippet will add is capture output as a table. This is a way to log all the information coming through on the Stripe payload, and we'll get into those details in a moment. The real magic happens under the Stripe Checkout API group, where we've added 3 new endnodes. Webhook secure, which is the function that creates the secure webhook signature and checks it and verifies it against the signature that Stripe provides for you. Webhooks test, which is just a simple endnode to verify that your webhook is firing, and then webhook secure function, which is where I'll show you the custom function. We're going to start with webhooks test. The goal of this endnode is pretty simple. We just want to get the webhook response when Stripe fires, and we're going to pull out the header, and we're going to view that header. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this latest change here. So we've got the latest version. And what you're going to see is we can't really do anything with run and debug because we need to get the payload from Stripe in order to activate this. So that's what we're going to do first. So what we need to do is copy this endpoint URL here and go over to Stripe and add it as a webhook. Here I'm in my Stripe developer account. I'm going to go over to developers. I'm going to click webhook, and then I'm going to add an endpoint. And I'm going to paste that value right in there. Test that our webhook is firing. And then I'm going to add some events to listen for, specifically in checkout, failed, succeeded, and completed. So now we've got our first endpoint, and it's waiting for our first event. To do that, what we're going to want to do is we're going to come over to this payments area here and grab a payment link, which we can then copy to clipboard, paste right like that. And this is giving us a payment form that we can fill out with some junk data. I'm using the 4242 fake credit card number here, and I'll just put in some other fake information and click pay. By doing this, the webhook has now been fired, and we can actually verify that on the Stripe side first. We can go over here and refresh this webhook page, and it will show us, there it is, a session has been sent through, and there's that Stripe signature that we're going to be designing for right there in the response. Now, one of the cool things is you don't have to continuously fill out that form. You can just click resend to resend this as you're iterating and testing. And I'm going to show you that now. We're going to come over back to the webhooks test. And what we want to know is, did this fire? To do that, we go up to the 3 dots on the right here and click request history. And here you can see I've had some requests already come through. Now I can make sure that the latest request has come through by refreshing, but you can see right there, that was just a minute ago. So this is the latest request. Now the input is everything that that payload sends us. So this is all the information that Stripe is providing to us. That's the webhook response, get all input. But what we're looking for actually is the header. That's where the Stripe signature is. And what we've done here is created a variable called request headers that pulls out an environment variable, HTTP headers here. And that's how we're going to get that header and return it as a response, which we can also see in our request history by going to that most recent and looking at output. And here it is. There is our header. So this is how you can just check to make sure that your webhook is firing and receiving information. All right, now it's time for us to do our secure webhook. First, we're going to go down here to Webhook Secure and open that up. And you can see there's our get all input statement that's going to bring that payload through. And you can see here the request header bringing through the request header from the HTTP header from the environment variable. But I've also got another environment variable here called Webhook Secure Secret. This is going to be an important component in this process. So I'm going to show you how that environment variable is set up. First, you'll go over to settings here. And this is the settings for the workspace, in this case for my snippet. And you can see here, I've got two variables. Now, you'll be able to see these values, but this is just a test account. But the first you're seeing here is my Stripe API secret. This is what you set up when you created the connection first between Xano and Stripe, if you were following the documentation example that we provided. But this webhook secure secret is an environment variable that I've added, and you're going to need to be able to pull that value in order to use the webhook secure end node. I'm going to show you where to get that now. So first we'll return back to our webhooks secure end node, because what we need to do is we need to set up a webhook. So our webhook test is showing us that the webhooks are firing and being received successfully. Now we're going to go ahead and add a new endpoint, but this time it's going to be for the webhook secure endpoint. So we're going to copy that URL. We're going to come back here, paste it into the endpoint URL. Secure webhook Xano. And again, we're going to select those checkout events so that when that checkout process is completed or fails, it's added in here. We can say add endpoint. All right, great. So now we're going to go ahead and get that payment link again, which you can find by going to payments and then payment links here on the left, and then copying that URL. And again, we're going to put that URL here, and we're going to run a transaction. Great, so now our fake transaction has processed, and we can go back over to our webhook. You can see here it says waiting for events, but when I refresh, it'll go ahead and show that latest session going through. And here we can see that Stripe signature again in that response. But what's new is we're going to look at this signing secret. We're going to reveal that, and we're going to copy this secret. And we're going to come back over to our settings, and we're going to put that value right here in Webhook Secure Secret. You will need the Webhook Secure Secret in order to run this snippet. The Stripe API secret we don't use in this specific snippet, so it's okay if that value is blank. All right, so now we've got our Webhook Secure Secret variable pulling our Webhook Secure Secret environmental value in here. We're now going to go through this whole payload, And we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to pull out the timestamp, the signature, and the fake signature that Stripe also provides. And then we're going to turn that into a payload, and we're going to hash it with an HMAC hash, which will then give us our signature check. And if the signatures match, then we're good to go. We're going to take that step by step. So let me show you in the documentation where this is all explained. When we look at the documentation in terms of verifying signatures manually, what it wants us to do is pull out the Stripe signature, extract the timestamp and the signatures from the header. So Stripe's advice is to split the header using the comma as a separator to get the list of elements, and then split again on the equals character to get the value pair, and then pull that value. So here's how we do that in Xano. First, we take the request header, that's that header file, and we get Stripe signature. How do I know how to get that? Well, that's part of the process that we just ran with our webhooks test, but we can see it here as well. So we ran this webhook on this side, webhook secure. So if we go over here to request history, we'll also see that it came by here. And if I look at request headers, I can see right there, Stripe signature is what I'm looking to get. But I can also see it in the output because I've built out everything that we're going to be using in the snippet in the output. And here you can see header, and here's that header object, and there's Stripe signature. So the easiest way to think about this is that this is getting the HTTP headers, and then it's using get, which you can add right there. And then it's finding the path because I've just simply pasted in Stripe signature. So it knows to go and get that. Next, it takes that Stripe signature that I just got and it splits it into an array. So it becomes an array signature and it filters for any empty values. You may have noticed in the object that sometimes you can actually see it right here on the documentation that sometimes there's a little extra added value at the end there. And so we're just clearing that out. And what I'm going to do so you can see the step-by-step is I'm going to populate the table capture output. What capture output is doing is in each column that we've added here, we're doing a couple things. So first, the type of column that we've added here is a JSON, and we're putting in the input and the header into these columns. So I can actually see if I refresh this, my latest call that came through. I can see the header that came through. There's my Stripe signature. And I can see the full input object with all the information from the order from Stripe. But I've also parsed out signature, timestamp, sig1, sig2, signed payload, signed HMAC, and webhook secret. So you'll see here that the webhook secret will change now that we've set up a new webhook. So I'll go ahead and resend this. And it's running through this function right now. Let's go ahead and see if it's completed by going into request history. And yep, there it is, just came through. So we can see that it came all the way down to add record. And what add record has done is it's captured the values for us. So this is a really easy way, since we can't use stop and debug from a webhook that's been fired. Instead, we can use a table to just capture all the values and make sure that we're seeing what we're expecting. So we wanted to get that header, we wanted to get that input, wanted to get that header Stripe signature, which is just pulling out the Stripe signature here. And then we wanted to turn that into an array. And then from that array, we get the timestamp, the sig, and the sig fake. And I'll go ahead and show you how that works now. So when we get that signature, here we go. We've got an array. So that's our first value. So this is, in an array, this is value 0, value 1, and value 2. And here you can see there's our timestamp, there's our first signature, and here's our second signature. So we've successfully captured all that information. Let's go ahead and refresh, and we can see the latest version. So here's the latest one coming through. There's our signature, timestamp, sig1, and sig2. So what we've done here is we converted the Stripe signature into an array by splitting it on the comma, as suggested by Stripe. And then on array sig0, that first value, we split on the equal sign, and then we use pop. What pop does is it pops the last element array off. So what it's doing is it's going in here, it's splitting on the equal sign. So now I have two values in my array, t and the timestamp, and then it pops the last value off and puts that in as sig timestamp, which is then stored in timestamp right here. And it's doing the same process with the first signature and the second. Now, if we look at Stripe's instructions, what we'll see here is that Stripe is providing us with a schema. T is, of course, the timestamp, and each signature is preceded by a V. The only valid live signature is V1. That's right here. To aid with testing, there's an additional fake signature here. In case you ever wanted to test, a failing signature, you can use that value as a way of doing it. What's important to understand is that Stripe is generating the signature using a hash-based method. It's a part of cryptography, and this is the cryptograph and the strength of the cryptograph, in this case SHA-256, which is cryptographically strong. And so what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that same process. So basically the same process that Stripe used to create the signature, we're going to do on the Xano side, so that we know that those signatures map and haven't been tampered with in transit. And that's pretty where this next step comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to prepare the signed payload string, which is going to come from concatenating the timestamp, which we already got from the array, with a period, and then the actual JSON payload. Now, this is not something that's in the documentation, but it is something that you can find on GitHub and Stack Overflow. The JSON payload needs to be raw. In other words, it's not meant to be encoded. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that when we pull through the webhook response, we change the encoding to none. Generally, by default, it'll be JSON, of course, because you're expecting a JSON object. But in order for this function to work, it needs to be none. So we're just going to select that now, none, and keep it like that. And what that's going to allow us to do is we're going to create this sig payload we're going to take that timestamp, and then we're going to concatenate. That's what this filter is, concatenate the webhook response with the separator being a dot. And you can see that in the table here in the signed payload. There's the timestamp with the dot, and then that whole payload that we saw in the input here. There it is. So by putting those two things together, we've essentially tagged the payload with a timestamp. And what we're going to do now is we're going to hash that payload with the HMAC SHA-256. And by the way, there are a full range of HMAC hashes that you can use here in terms of methods. We're obviously going to use the one that Stripe is requiring. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the key, which is that webhook secure secret that you store as an environment variable. So that's not being passed during the transaction. And we can just save that. And so now we've got our new signature. And what we're going to do is store that in the database. So we've got what the signature should be, sig1, and then the signature that we create, HMAC. Okay. So now we've got the whole thing together. Let's go look at it. So here we've got sig1 and sig HMAC, the same signature. So we know that we've completed this successfully. Okay, great. So this is how you can secure your webhook following Stripe guidelines with Xano built out with this snippet. And as we'll see right here in the output, all that information we captured, the input itself, the payload, the signature 1 and 2, the header, this HBAC that we created, which clearly matches here. And there's the signature, timestamp, the signed payload, and the webhook secret, all captured here. Now, of course, to secure this, my recommendation would be that you don't store the webhook secret in your database. You can just remove this by making it blank like that, and then saving the changes. But we don't want Stripe to just hit the webhook secure endnode. We want it to do things with our database. And so that's where a custom function is coming in next. As a part of the snippet, we've created the webhook secure check as a custom function, which you can also do by coming up here and clicking convert to function. What I recommend doing is, if you have an endnode that you want to convert to a custom function, clone it first and then convert that to a function, because when you convert it to a function, it will take your existing endnode and it will put everything in the function stack into a custom function here and convert your endnode to only calling that custom function. But what's great about this custom function is we can provide a precondition. So we've walked through how this whole process works. It works exactly the same when you call webhook secure func as it does with webhook secure, only in this case it's going through a custom function. But what it will do with the precondition is it will check that the signature you create with the HBAC hashing is equal to the signature that Stripe gave you. And if there's any differences, it'll let you know the signature doesn't match with an access denied message. So what's great about that is that you can now put the webhook secure function in front of any call that you receive. So for example, if I was building a new endpoint, purchases, and I wanted any new purchase from Stripe to fire into a webhook here for purchases, but I wanted to make sure that that was valid first. All I'd have to do is say plus custom function webhook secure, and that will run all the input data that's come through, check it against the signature hash. If it passes, then I can add other functions beneath this. For example, I might create, I might want to get all input and then parse that input. But now I want to get it as JSON. So now what will happen is, if the signature isn't valid, it will be rejected. But if it is valid, then it will go forward and I can just build my function as expected, get that webhook response, and build out the information to my table. So that's how you can use the webhook secure func custom function to basically protect any webhook that you set up with Stripe following their instructions.